What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3. Got a big episode of the podcast in store for you guys today as I take you inside a big recruiting weekend for Dan Lanning and the Ducks up in Eugene as the month of April opens up and spring practice resumes for the defending Big Ten champions. Before I get into today's episode, do me a quick favor. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, come see us at scoopduck.com. $1 gets you 7 days of access to all of our premium articles, premium content. I have been posting a ton of interviews and updates from last week and last weekend's visitors. And we got all the latest intel and all the recruiting scoop that you could ask for over at ScoopDuck. So come try us out. Come check us out because $1 also gets you access to the rest of the On3 network. So you can see what's going on all across the great sport of college football. So let's start with some of the latest that I have been able to gather coming out of a big weekend for Dan Lanning and the Ducks in Eugene. The first guy I'm going to talk about is somebody that our Scoop Duck subscribers heard about first, and that is 2025 Mobile, Alabama, St. Paul's Episcopal 5-star edge rusher Anthony Tank Jones. Jones was on campus this weekend for a very important visit. And just to give you guys a little bit of background on Jones, he's listed at 6'3.5", 235 pounds, the number 18 player nationally, the number 2 edge rusher, and the number 1 prospect in Alabama, a 5-star prospect on the On3 industry ranking at 96.22. Sorry, I wasn't full screen over here. Sorry about that. But here we are. We got some highlights of Anthony Tank Jones on the screen if you guys are watching us here on the YouTube channel. And yeah, like I was saying, this is a huge visit, was a huge visit for Oregon because Jones had only been on campus once before this past weekend. That was all the way back in November. So it was a game day visit, Oregon versus Maryland, a commanding win for the Ducks last season in Eugene. But when I did catch up with him after that visit, he was essentially saying that it was kind of a quick trip and he really didn't get to do a whole lot, but he did get to meet Phil Knight, the Nike co-founder, was in town that weekend. So that was definitely something that I guess Oregon might have pulled out to try to sweeten up that visit a little bit. But he was back in Eugene over the weekend on the tail end of last week. He got in Thursday, left on Sunday. And I think this was a great development for Oregon because they needed a little bit of juice. They need a little bit of juice when it comes to recruiting. We all know about how Ohio State, USC, and some other schools are popping off on the recruiting trail lately. And I don't think Oregon's going to stay quiet for too long. And especially with Tom flipping from Oregon to USC, I think you wanted to get some more positive developments along the defensive line. And there aren't many edge rushers in the nation that are better than Anthony Jones here. Oregon's picking up some steam in the Southeast. I mean, you're not going to get every guy that you recruit out of the Southeast, but Oregon has some steam with the state of Alabama in particular because Jones is the number 1 prospect in the state of Alabama, and Oregon also signed the top-ranked prospect from the state of Alabama last year in 5-star plus cornerback Naeem Offord out of Birmingham, Alabama, Parker High School. That was a dramatic recruitment with an early signing period flip from Ohio State to Oregon. And I remember putting that pick in. It was a pretty wild moment. And it was fun to see the Ducks get some fireworks during the early signing period. So as far as how the visit went, I think the trip went really well. I was told that both of Jones's parents were with him on the trip. So it's always big when you can have any family make a trip, especially that far away. I think that only helps your chances. So getting him back on campus was big. I think that he hasn't set any official visits just yet, but coming out of this visit, I think Oregon is in a great position to more than likely land an official visit with Anthony Jones. And they are battling schools like Alabama and Auburn, obviously 2 heavy hitters on the recruiting trail that have made it a priority to pursue in-state talent every single year. And I don't know. It's always interesting to watch Auburn for me because they can get all these elite recruits, but they haven't had too many great seasons or too many seasons to write home about in recent years. But yeah, that's kind of who Oregon's going against here in this recruitment. There's more. You can talk about North Carolina, where he took a visit not too long ago. But I don't think that North Carolina is necessarily a serious contender here, but they're going to try with new head coach Bill Belichick. So I'm trying to catch up with Jones for an interview, get some comments from him on the visit, but that's kind of just what I was able to gather from one of my sources. So starting this episode off with a bang, a 5-star visitor in Anthony Tank Jones out of Alabama. Okay, getting my next highlights up on the screen here. Let's talk about a commit, one of the headliners in Oregon's 2026 recruiting class under Dan Lanning, modern day offensive tackle Kodi Greene. Important to note with Cody Green is that he is an on-3 outlier. And if you're wondering what I mean by that, it means that on-3 is higher on him than the other recruiting services. So he is ranked by On3 as the number 9 prospect in all of America, the number 3 offensive tackle, and the number 1 prospect in the Golden State. 6'6", 310 pounds, has been committed to Oregon since August 12th, 2024. But boy, is this an interesting recruitment to follow, as USC, Texas, and Washington are also trying to flip him. They're all trying to flip him away from his pledge to the Ducks. But that makes this weekend trip that much more important. Cody Greene got to Eugene with one big goal in mind, and that was to keep a close eye on Malik Terry and how he was coaching the rest of the offensive line, seeing that the Ducks now have spring practice going. I've been telling you guys that Oregon wasn't really bringing in a lot of visitors because they didn't have spring practice going on. So why bring guys in when you don't have stuff going on and a product to show them, coaches in action, facilities being used, things like that. And Green essentially told me in the interview that that Malik Terry style of coaching kind of suits him perfectly. And this is going to be a fun one to follow because he's saying all the right things coming out of the visit. Although the one interesting thing that he did say when I was just asking him about his commitment to the Ducks is that he is more or less still open. So that obviously adds a little bit of a layer of intrigue because a lot of committed prospects, not just to Oregon, but committed prospects in general, take visits to other programs. And I know Cody Greene has been very transparent about his thinking throughout the whole process. When the visits kind of started to ramp up after his commitment earlier on this year, it was really just him saying that, hey, I want to take these trips to make absolutely certain that Oregon is where I want to be, that Oregon is the school for me. And USC, you really don't have to say too much about USC right now. They are absolutely crushing it. Number 1 class in the country, and they have really had an all-out blitz on in-state talent. And I think for Greene, it was an interesting question that I got to ask him a couple weeks ago, was just asking him about the push from USC and their prioritizing SoCal and California guys. And he said that it was kind of cool to see, more or less, but it doesn't necessarily carry the same weight with a guy like him because you have to remember Cody Greene is a Seattle native and he only transferred to Mater Dei last year before the start of his junior season. So I'm going to be very interested to see how this recruitment unfolds. Texas, if you want to talk about Texas a little bit, he's scheduled to take a visit out to Austin for the Longhorns spring game on April 26th. Which is the same day. Actually, I don't know if that's their spring game, but that visit on April 26th is on the same day as Oregon's spring game. And the Longhorns have maybe not a super strong pipeline, but they have recruited modern day players in the past. And not too long ago, you just have to look at Brandon Baker in the class of 2024 from modern day. He was being heavily recruited by Oregon, but he ended up choosing Texas. And then Washington, kind of rounding out this group of schools that are trying to flip Greene from his Oregon pledge. You have the Washington Huskies led by Jed Fish, who are by no means a heavy hitter on the recruiting trail, but he is from Seattle. So I think that that's kind of that hometown angle that we're seeing in play here and why he is giving the Huskies another look. I know he's also mentioned Alabama at a recent point in his recruitment because he grew up in Seattle. He has a really good relationship with Kalen DeBoer and a lot of those staffers that followed him from Seattle to Tuscaloosa when he took over for Nick Saban following his retirement. So I think that those are really the main schools that we have to kind of keep an eye on here with Oregon commit Kodi Greene. Right now, I feel relatively confident that he's going to end up sticking with his commitment. But the interesting development that we have to kind of monitor here was in one of my interviews with him before his Oregon visit was that he was going to take these visits this spring, and then he wasn't ruling out maybe shutting down his recruitment or ultimately choosing to explore other options, and that a decision like that, which is kind of a final decision, but it feels weird saying that 8 months from the early signing period, but a decision of some sort could potentially come before he takes his official visits here in the summer. He has official visits set to Oregon, USC, and Texas. We'll see if he sets one to Washington, but I don't really view them as a super serious contender in this recruitment. Kodi Greene is obviously a major priority for the Ducks to hang on to, but they are also recruiting elite offensive line prospects like Immanuel Iheanacho from Baltimore, Maryland. He was in town this weekend for a visit. Haven't gotten a chance to catch up with him just yet, but that was another massive visit, seeing that he is a five-star prospect and that Oregon is battling the likes of Maryland, LSU, Texas A&M, Alabama, and others in that recruitment. But he's been pretty vocal about where Maryland stands in his recruitment, and that's at the top, with Mike Locksley and the Terps having a newfound priority on in-state recruiting. And they got some juice because they got Zion Ely, the number one edge rusher in the country from St. Francis Academy out there in Baltimore. He's committed and he's in the fold as well. But Immanuel Iheanacho is a big target for Oregon along the offensive line, as is five-star Nixa, Missouri offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell, who's been making a pretty big round of trips during his spring break. Got to see if he is scheduled to come back to Eugene anytime soon, but I'll make sure you guys are kept up to date on all the latest recruiting developments. And the best way to stay up to date on all the recruiting developments around Oregon is to make sure you're following me on all social media platforms. That is at Torres Sports, that name right there on your screen. Recently started up my TikTok page, trying to get more consistent with that, but been really enjoying those videos, just kind of raw, unfiltered, instant reaction kind of news and analysis. So make sure you guys are locked in over there if you aren't already. Okay, let's stay at modern day. Why not? We know Oregon loves to recruit modern day. And now we got to talk about another big time prospect that was in Eugene last week, that being four-star wide receiver Caden Dixon Wyatt. Funny story here. I was actually at Modern Day last week on Thursday to try to get an interview with Dixon Wyatt, but he wasn't at practice. Why is that? It's because he was on his way to Oregon, or maybe he was already at Oregon at that point. But Caden Dixon Wyatt is a guy that has become a big, big priority for Oregon. And I shouldn't say has become, because he's been a major priority target for Oregon for a long time now. He called Oregon his leader not too long ago in an interview with Chad Simmons, but it seems like this recruitment is heating up, turning up a notch as he is coming off of recent visits to not only Oregon, but also Ohio State and most recently USC over the weekend. And it seems like USC is obviously a school to watch, but Ohio State is the school that is setting the pace right now in Dixon Wyatt's recruitment. The other note that we have to mention here is that Chris Henry Jr. chose to shut down his recruitment, another modern day wide receiver that Oregon was recruiting heavily. But with Chris Henry Jr. choosing to shut down his recruitment, that makes a guy like Caden Dixon Wyatt that much more of a priority for new wide receivers coach Ross Douglas, who has been hosting premier wide receiver targets in Eugene, like Chris Henry Jr. before he shut down his recruitment, like Caden Dixon Wyatt this weekend, like Messiah Hampton, the New York wide receiver. Maybe we'll talk about him a little bit later. But as for Dixon Wyatt, I think that Oregon's doing all the right things here in this recruitment. They obviously have some ground to make up. Maybe they can get him back on campus before his scheduled official visit in June. They do have the last official visit, I'm pretty sure. I think that's the June 20th through 22nd weekend out there in Eugene. So I think that the timeline favors Oregon if you're looking for kind of some areas of positivity, but that doesn't mean everything in recruiting. I just think that if you're a coaching staff, 9 times out of 10, maybe more than that, you're going to want to take that last official visit date if you can get it. The other thing we have to mention here, Texas, I think, is another one to watch for Caden Dixon-Wyatt. Their wide receiver coach is a Mater Dei alum, so that obviously gives him some inroads and some ties to the Monarch program in the Trinity League out here in Southern California. But I think that Caden Dixon-Wyatt, him, Jalen Lott, like those are some of the top wide receiver targets that Ross Douglas would love to add to Oregon's 2026 class. And I think the only other note that I'll throw in here when we're talking wide receiver recruiting, I think we need to keep an eye on Rashad Samples as well, because he's a former wide receivers coach. He was coaching on Kenny Dillingham's Arizona State staff, coaching the wideouts before he ended up getting hired by Oregon. So I think that is a guy who has been a tremendous asset on the recruiting trail, obviously at the running back position, obviously in the state of Texas, but I think that he is probably doing a little bit to help recruit these wide receivers. I haven't asked about him as far as like wide receiver recruiting goes, but I know that he was involved in that Chris Henry recruitment as well when he was still considering the Ducks. So Caden Dixon-Wyatt is a huge name that we got to continue following here for Oregon in the 2026 class. Ohio State may lead now, but I wouldn't rule out. I'm definitely not ruling out Oregon just because Ohio State is setting the pace right now. All right, what else do we have here? We got another receiver that we can talk about. Maybe this will be our last guy of today. Not too sure yet. But we have a big wide receiver to talk about here that was also on campus over the weekend, and that is Dakota Grant out of the state of Michigan. And Oregon hasn't done a whole lot of recruiting in the state of Michigan, but maybe looks like that is not going to be the case for too much longer, because we know that Ross Douglas is from the state of Ohio, so he's a Midwest guy. And I think that gives Oregon more of a shot with some of these Midwest prospects. And Grant, 6'1", 190-pound receiver out of Harper Woods High School in Michigan. He's the number 3 wide receiver in the On 300 rankings, the number 21 overall prospect, and top-ranked player in the state of Michigan. He's been pretty busy on the recruiting trail this spring, taking visits to Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan State, I want to say, as well. So this was a guy that Ross Douglas wanted to get on campus here, kind of get the ball rolling. This was his first visit out to Oregon. I have a full update with quotes from Grant available on ScoopDuck. But I think the nice thing about this visit for Oregon and Dakota Grant is that he sees himself coming back for another visit. And he said he may be getting back as soon as June. So I think that's a positive development. And for all the work that Oregon's doing right now in the 2026 class, and the 2026 class is obviously at the forefront of the recruiting discussion, Oregon's doing a really good job bringing some super talented 2027 recruits onto campus for visits as well. They're kind of laying that foundation with some of these elite prospects, whether it is a guy like Dakota Grant out in Michigan or top prospects in California for 2027. I think they're doing a tremendous job, and the best coaching staffs and the best teams in the country are capable of recruiting multiple classes at a high level. That's exactly what we saw Oregon do with this 2026 class when the 2025 cycle was at the forefront, and they were having a lot of guys in for visits over there. So, Dakota Grant, he's a can't miss talent, really elite dude at the slot receiver position. He can kind of play it all over the place. He said during the visit that Coach Douglas told him to keep an eye on DeCorian Moore because he plays kind of every position, and that's the role that Oregon sees Grant playing should he choose to become a Duck. But whether it's the film here, playing for Harper Woods, or making crazy plays for South Florida Express on the 7-on-7 circuit, which he's been doing this spring, Dakota Grant is a can't miss talent. I think that's the easiest way to put it. I mean, this is just an absolute dude. And I'm going to be very interested to see what Oregon can do in this recruitment, because I believe Michigan has the lead for Dakota Grant, which isn't a huge shock, seeing that he's a top player in that state. And the Wolverines have become a more formidable recruiting power now that they are kind of participating and contending in the area of name, image, and likeness. So I'm going to be interested to see what else happens in that recruitment with Dakota Grant. And Oregon doesn't have a 2027 commitment just yet, but maybe they're going to get one here later on in the spring, or as we get into the month of May or June with some of these official visits, because even with official visits, you're going to have rising seniors coming into town for those visits, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to have underclassmen or younger guys visiting as well. So you got to make sure that you utilize all of that time, all of the opportunity to get FaceTime with these guys. But I know it's been kind of quiet for Oregon, but I don't think that that's going to be the case the rest of this month. I think that we're going to see these weekends more than likely get progressively bigger and bigger as we get closer to that April 26th spring game. Feeling pretty good about where Oregon stands right now. I'm the most curious to see what happens the rest of this month with quarterback recruiting, seeing that, of course, Jared Curtis is set for a May 5th decision. Will he commit to Oregon, or will he go back to Georgia and recommit to Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs? Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to add here. I mean, it's a great time to see us at ScoopDuck. You got spring football going on, you got recruiting going on. Make sure you sign up for the ScoopDuck newsletter. That is a tremendous time as well. You get all the latest Duck news sent straight to your inbox. We also have the On3 app. I know there's been some technical hiccups here and there, but being able to have the On3 app there, you can read all the stories that we write. You can read the message boards and interact with thousands of other Duck fans. It's just a great time, great place to be. You got myself, Justin Hopkins, Colin King. You also have Big Ten Ted, who recently joined ScoopDuck and is chatting over there on the boards and throwing his content from his podcasts and YouTube videos over on the board. So it's truly the best community that you're going to find for Oregon football, and I truly believe that. So just before we get out of here, like the video, subscribe to the ScoopDuck On3 YouTube channel. You can follow me anywhere on any social media platform at mtorres sports. Subscribe to scoopduck.com. $1 gets you a week of access, and share the show. Find another Duck fan, say, hey, have you heard the Ducks Dish podcast? No, you haven't? Well, you got to listen to Max because he's dialed in when it comes to this recruiting stuff. And I love talking Ducks all day, every day. But greatly appreciate you guys taking some time out to tune into the show. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.